is there a harder week in hockey this season by any team than what the Wild have coming up with a road home back-to-back with Dallas, Vegas, and then the Caps coming into town feeling great about themselves, and then a home with the Devils. So this is a big 2 points that they got to get. The teams behind them just never seem to lose right now, and it was so crazy Thursday night. Calgary wins. Utah wins against Buffalo, and Buffalo, Tage throws the puck in his own net on a delayed penalty.
Right. Yep.
And then at least then you're like, all right, well, the Blues are going to get 2 points and Vancouver's going to get none. And then our old buddy Brock Besser scored an unbelievable goal with 2 seconds left to force overtime and get them a point. So it just doesn't get any easier. So you just can't keep your foot off the gas. But to your point, Kevin, the last 2 games have been extremely impressive. Obviously, the way they came out with their foot on the gas against Seattle, doing exactly what Jake Middleton said the game before, which was, start to be proactive rather than reactive. And then the game against a very good LA team and grinding that out, rallying back to win in regulation.
That was impressive,
Very
especially
impressive.
Considering how they came out of that game on Saturday against the Kings team that, I don't care what anyone says, they're going to be a monster in that Pacific Division and the Western Conference. That's a big, heavy, talented team. And if they get goaltending, they're going to be a tough team to contend with. And for the Wild to take care of them, considering the way they were down 1-0 in that hockey game as well. For a team that's struggling for goals, they figured out a way to get it done. That was a huge, impressive victory.
Yeah. To your point.
I was talking to Twitterless Joe when he was in town, and after the game, and he says,
"You know what? Alex Micheletti on Twitter makes up for Twitterless Joe."
No, he does.
My God, does he?
He does. Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah, I will continue. But I said, well, Joe, give me your perspective of the Minnesota Wild, and he said, you know what? They don't score a lot, and for obvious reasons, they have Kaprizov out, and they're not a high octane offense. That being said, so you know what? No matter what, even in their losses, for the majority of the time, this team works hard all the time.
Yeah,
all the time. And he might be comparing it to the team that he covers on a nightly basis.
Oh my God!
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, which has been a nightmare.
Yeah.
But, that's what I kind of took away. The resiliency of Minnesota with a number of key guys out at different times, whether it be their 3D or whether it be, the forwards that they have out now, they just seem to, they stick with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was what was so concerning to me about the St. Louis game is that they did not play that way. Their work ethic, they finally seemed tired.
Yep.
And, every single night right now with these guys out of the lineup, they've just got to put in such they no margin for error, and they got to just exude so much energy, and they got to play such a hard branded defensive hockey to win that eventually I think it just catches up to you. And that's why they've had so many, not only days off lately, but even on usually the way the pattern is that if you take a game off, a practice day off, the next day is a mandatory, morning skate. Mm-hmm. And lately they are having mandatory optional morning skates where they are telling guys that they can't even go on the ice after not practicing the day before. And that's because of the amount of heavy workload that these guys are getting lately. So, it has been impressive that the way that they worked. They're going to get, I hope, for themselves, a huge boost tonight by just getting Johansson and Brodin, especially back in the lineup. Rossi looks like he escaped harm's way with that shot that he took to the knee. And then, you're just waiting for Eriksson Ek and Kaprizov and these guys and praying that nobody else gets hurt because, as we know, I mean, they just, that's why they're keeping Liam Ogren here. Like, Liam Ogren can't play today. Yeah. He's not allowed because he's here on an emergency basis for those other guys. But, the way that they lose guys are just like, why even send them down until they see that they get out of this alive?
Yeah, we talk a lot about the playoffs and matchups and this, that, and the other thing. And, and Kevin and I were chatting earlier about the fact that, we always find out at the end of the playoffs, this guy needs, surgery. That guy's hurt. He was playing with this, that, and the other thing. Isn't the biggest thing going into the playoffs the health of a team?
Absolutely. And, that's why you're hoping for Eriksson Ek. That's why they're really, keeping Marcus out right now. Marcus played with this injury for a while, and gutted through it, but it finally got to the point where they had to just pull him out and try to get him healthy because the playoffs are so important. And Marcus Foligno's had a really quality year, especially defensively. Unfortunately for the Wild, we've seen this story before where they just don't seem to go into the playoffs healthy. I still remember 2018 was just beyond belief. They lose Ryan Suter with 5 games left in the season. Jared Spurgeon's playing on essentially a torn hamstring or something. It was, he should not have been in that lineup. They lose Parisi in that lineup, I think, with in that series he got sandwiched with 2 minutes left in the game by Sherratt and somebody broke his collarbone.
Yep.
So you just hope that this year that you get Eriksson and Kaprizov back, get them some games, and get them playing well.
What does I don't think anybody knows, and maybe you know, I would have to assume you would say if you knew, what are you hearing about 97? What are you hearing about 14? Those are the big question marks from Wild Nation all across the state of hockey.
I get the impression that Kaprizov at least is going to skate later this week, this upcoming week coming up. There was some talk that maybe he has already been on the ice, at least around the trade deadline, which is why I was so pushing on Billy about the LTIR situation. At the trade deadline, what I was told was that he visited a surgeon in New York and essentially was told you can't go on the ice until later this month for the first time. And then you do the math and you realize with the playoffs starting April 19th, if he comes back, it's probably going to be with a couple games back later. So do you hold him out, or do you hold Eriksson Ek out? Or do you make a move and essentially assume that somebody else is going to be on season-ending LTIR? The way this season has gone, honestly, when I saw Rossi go down the other day, I'm like, holy smokes, But so I do think that light's at the end of the tunnel here, and that we're going to see Kaprizov back at some point. But again, he's got to get on the ice, see how he's feeling. It's been a long time since he's played hockey, only 3 games since before Christmas. And we know that he has a certain standard that he feels he has to be at, and that's why he had the surgery. Like, this is something the surgery that he had is something that a lot of guys can gut through for the rest of the year, but he's a different animal.
Yeah.
And
that's why he's top 10
exactly.
player in the league,
and he
whatever.
just and now looking back, like with the news that came out at the end of January that he was having surgery, like when the last game that he played in Chicago, and we were interviewing Matt Zuccarello next to him, and Matt was cracking these jokes, and looking back on it, like Kaprizov wasn't smiling, wasn't laughing. Even when he went to the trainer's room that night, he just looked like in hindsight.
Yeah,
he looked glum.
Yeah,
and I think that he realized that was it.
What do you know? Because of social media, I know you were at XL Energy Center yesterday and last night. What'd you see? We had David Carl on earlier. What'd you see from Zeev Buyum?
Well, they played a really good defensive type of game. I thought they were a little lackadaisical the first 2 periods, and no more than that goal that they gave up with, in the final seconds of the second period. But they defended really hard against an Arizona State team that's really good.
Yeah,
they got some horses.
Good.
It was fun catching up with Mike Sillinger. Silly is what we used to call him in Florida, Kevin. Silly.
Was he part of the rat trick?
No, he wasn't. He came after.
Check your Twitter.
But I was actually sitting next to him. I was sitting next to him when he was traded out of Florida. So I got the. I just turned to him like, I know you're a little shell-shocked here, but can I get a quote?
Mike was in Florida, right? You know that.
Yes,
Okay.
But Zeev last night, I think, tried to do too much. I don't know if you watched the game, Pat.
I didn't know.
He looked like he was trying to do too much, and I don't know if it's because he knew the entire Wild brass were watching or what it was. But at least the first 2 periods, I didn't think that he played overly great. But he defended hard. And obviously, we're going to see him very, very soon in this lineup. The question is when. Do they lose early in the NCAAs, or if they go to the Frozen Four, the Wild will only have 1 game after that.
Yeah, and that's the question I had for you then. If you look at Minnesota's D-core throughout the year, they've been pretty good.
Yeah.
And that correlates with how Gustafsson plays and, all that kind of stuff, and Fleury. That being said, Billy typically is a guy that likes to nurture, bring these guys along, other than a Brock Faber like we saw.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think Zeev will be one of those guys? I mean,
they are burning the year. Whether it's one game, whether it's one game or not, he will be here. The question is, does he play?
Yeah, that's the question I have.
So, let's just say they lose next weekend and they sign him pretty quickly.
Yeah.
If they are in a playoff meat grinder, he's not getting in the lineup right away. There's just no way.
Right.
He's not. I mean, we're seeing that. Chisholm's just played second pair defense for 3-4 weeks here. and he's out of the lineup today because they love what John Merrill and Zach Bogosian are bringing. So obviously, if Brodin and Middleton are healthy, if they are already feeling like they're keeping John Merrill in, John's playing in the playoffs, and John's going to play down the stretch. Now, if they get their playoff spot or positioning locked, then maybe we see Zeev get in a couple of games.
Some guys
and certainly, I would assume that game against Anaheim, which would be awesome if that was his debut, is essentially a hometown team.
Oh, that's true.
You know, that final game of the regular season. But I don't think this is – if they are healthy, I do not think this is going to be like Faber in that Dallas series.
Yep.
Now, similarly, when Faber left the Frozen Four with the Gophers and he played those final two games, I think at Chicago and Nashville.
Yep.
He was so good, they never thought he was going to play in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But really, I just don't see how he gets in the playoffs unless it's like all of a sudden they're down in the series and you want to get some sort of spark.
Yeah.
So I just don't think this is going to be the same thing. And, again, it's hard for – if they are fighting for their playoff lives here, it's hard for the management to go to the coaching staff and say, hey, I know you trust these two defensemen or this one defenseman, but – put him, take him out for our 19-year-old prospect. That's just not. It's not the time to do it. I'm already getting ready for the like somebody asked me a joke the other day. Now that Juracek's sent down, like, what's the next thing you're going to be annoyed about? And like, this is clearly going to be the next thing. I mean, it is just going to every day when he is not in line rushes, it's going to be just
put him
in.
The Brett Blakemores of the world.
Exactly.
That.
By the way, did Brett happen to tell Hartsey how big of a fan he was when he called him up for the interview today?
How did that off-air conversation go, Brett?
Short and sweet to the point.
Hello, Mr. Hartman. I'll get you right on, sir.
That's right.
I have a question outside of the Wild, which I've been reading up, but I don't know anything about. The possibility of expansion.
Yeah.
And Houston being one, maybe Atlanta for the third time.
Mm-hmm.
What do you know about that?
Yeah, I mean, I did that agent poll about 2-3 weeks ago, and Houston was by far the runaway favorite for the two expansion teams that everybody picked, and it was because of this billionaire owner that they feel committed. It would be obviously an immediate natural rivalry with Dallas. I think the biggest thing that I'll be curious is both need sort of new buildings.
New buildings, yep.
When does that get built? And if one's before the other, does one come in? Like, do they do this like Vegas and Seattle where they don't come in the same year? That could be something.
Mm-hmm.
And remember when the Wild came in, they were part of that 4-team expansion with Nashville, Atlanta, and Columbus. Columbus and Minnesota were the only two that came in together, but the other two came in the years before.
Yep.
But expansion's coming. I mean, when you're talking $1.5–2 billion expansion fees,
is that the fee now?
Originally, it's
right?
funny. Originally, they were saying 1.2, but then the way it works is like Tampa just sold for 1.8.
Yeah.
So you can't all of a sudden now kind of have an expansion team and say just a $1.2 billion expansion fee. At least that's the rationale. Now, can they get it? I mean, this guy's a billionaire, this Houston owner. They have a couple groups in Atlanta. One sort of led by one that's like almost I think Kevin Weeks is fronting, and the other that Anson Carter's fronting. So maybe one of those two are whoever's coming in. Whichever group sort of quasi wins is one going to wind up being the president of the team potentially between Anson and Kevin. So. But I don't know. I'm one of those people. I'm one of those people that actually want them to go back to Atlanta.
Yeah, maybe so. And then, but my question is: are we beating a dead horse with Atlanta or not? Or did
that's the thing.
Did they screw up in terms of their marketing?
That Spirit ownership down there was like the worst ownership in like pro sports history. So I think that they were doomed from the moment that they got that the new Atlanta Thrashers came in.
Yeah.
And then the same thing with the Atlanta Flames was, obviously that was sort of before my time, even though it was kind of alive.
Tom Lysiak,
but I mean,
Phil Muir. Phil Muir?
Absolutely. And it was another poor ownership. So Atlanta, they put it in, downtown. People like where they're putting this place is actually north of even where the Braves are now.
Oh.
So they're talking like the Alpharetta area. Obviously, a lot of money up there. I think it'll be interesting, landing at the Atlanta airport and trekking up there because of the traffic situation for all these teams and everybody that comes in there. That's the only thing is Alpharetta is way north of the airport, and Atlanta traffic is nothing to be.
Are there other cities besides those two that?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Kansas
they eventually want to go. Well, I think
I think
I think where they'd love to eventually go back to is Arizona, but the question is, when do you build an arena there? Who's the owner? All that stuff. Like the league wants to get back there, but Houston's coming.
Yeah.
And Atlanta's probably coming.
What about Hamilton? I've always heard the possibility of having another team in and around
Toronto. They want
a
lot of people want 2 teams in Toronto.
They could do that, right?
They could. I mean, theoretically, I don't think it's going to all of a sudden take away from people becoming Maple Leafs season ticket holders.
Right.
Yeah. Might hurt the Sabres though.
Oh, kill the Sabres.
Yeah.
Right? And
so that's the one thing. The other hopefully we're not, nobody listens to us in Winnipeg. But I think there's a lot of talk out there that you have 2 expansion teams and then maybe an eventual, when Arizona gets its act together, another relocation.
Come on.
And it, honestly, I mean, Winnipeg right now with everything up there, from the financials to the fact that they can't even sell out the smallest arena in the league to, things like that. There's a lot of talk that, the agents are at least talking. The league wants no part of this conversation.
Yeah.
But agents that I talked to for that agent poll are convinced that if they have 2 expansion teams before Arizona gets its act together and they find an owner and a building and all that, that if 7-8 years from now, Winnipeg still is a market
they only seat 15,000.
Exactly.
Right? I mean,
and the corporate it's not big up there and all that type of stuff. So it wouldn't be something if Winnipeg eventually moved back to Arizona. This is going to get aggregated, and it's going to be a major problem. And we'll just blame Fallness.
No, don't blame me. Let's blame Brett and his breakaways.
Well, even yesterday, I was aggravated. Apparently on Reddit, I was getting all these tweets that I said that 70% that there was a 70% chance that Marco Rossi's traded this summer, and I was repeating what Joe Smith said on his podcast.
Yeah.
If I had given my percentage, I probably would have said it was more.
Yeah. Here's a question from the 651 area code about Danila Yurov. What's the latest with him? Does he come over from the KHL this year? And what have you heard about his development?
Well, I mean, he's coming back from ankle surgery right now. I believe he's not back yet, but maybe he is. The playoffs are starting. They pushed the contracts back in the KHL back a month, so his contract ends end of May. So if the Wild are still alive, maybe.
Wow.
but my guess is that this is more just sign him after the season for next year.
What type of a player is he?
Yeah. They think he's very dynamic. Obviously, his numbers have been down in the KHL this year. You don't know why that is. Sometimes it's because
Ustindinov was dynamic.
Yeah. I don't know if they thought that because he really never scored there. But Yurov is supposed to be a star,
Okay.
And that's what they're hoping. And I think they look at him more at center. I know that the Wild are extremely happy about him, and to Bill Guerin's, to what he was saying at his point, about the prices being outrageous at the deadline. It's like if you took the equivalent of what the Brock Nelson trade was to the Colorado Avalanche with the first-round pick in Callum Ritchie, that would be a first-round pick in Danila Yurov. Well, no Wild fan would want Bill Guerin to make that type of trade, especially for somebody that you might be able to sign this offseason anyway. But that, not that they have prospects that are totally untouchable, but I think Yurov is probably the closest to that with Wallstedt.
Have you booked all your travel for
Vegas?
Italy? No.
Oh, okay.
No, for Italy.
No, well, for next year, for the Olympics? Not yet.
But you are going.
Yeah, I'm covering the Olympics.
You're unbelievable.
So this summer in August, the NHL Media Tour Europe version is either going to be in Munich or Milan. So I might be in Milan twice in 6 months because I'll be back there for the Olympics. And then actually our Russo Lapanta trip next summer is supposed to go back to Milan, Como area. So it might be 3 times in a year that I'm in.
What a life.
Yeah, I know.
What a life you live. Just the world traveler. Good for you. For me, the best story...
Did you hear the shot I took at you and Halvey on Gord's podcast yesterday? On the Broken Sticks podcast? So we opened the show, and he welcomed me to the show, and I said, I knew you were getting around to me again when the last 2 guests were Fallness and Halverson.
Were they
Micheletti
really?
hasn't been on there?
Yeah, I have.
Oh,
Twice.
you have?
Twice.
Well, all right. Well, then you just illustrated Russo's point. I get it. The best story of this season for me, Michael, when you talk about the Minnesota Wild, is Philip Gustafsson. I don't think many people thought coming into this year he was going to have an impact. It was going to be Jesper Wallstedt and probably Marc-Andre Fleury, and he was going to be the third wheel and be jettisoned for... Luckily, none of that came to be, because what a resurgent year it's been for him, for the most part, start to finish, but especially right now.
Other than that one stretch in January, he's been excellent, as consistent as can be. And that's why they're riding him right now. Like, I know that, sentimental Wild fans and Marc-Andre Fleury fans want to see him get as many starts as he can before he wraps up his career here. And I'm sure Mark would love to be playing, but he gets it as well. I mean, my guess is actually Mark was probably going to start this game, but you have Gus coming off a shutout, and most coaches are going to ride the hot hand. Especially, again, this organization knows how important these 2 points are today. And you don't want to mess around when you have at Dallas, home Vegas, home Washington, home Jersey, at Jersey this week. And then as we just talked about Twitterless Joe, I mean, we know the Rangers aren't very good right now, but you're still going into Madison Square Garden against a Rangers team that's desperate, then an Islanders team that's desperate. It just doesn't get easier.
No.
So they really want to get these 2 points, and that's why they're going with him today. But to your point, he's been quiet in net. That's the really most impressive thing about this stretch here. And tonight will be his 6th straight start, I believe.
Yeah.
And full disclosure, I'm not a goalie aficionado. So when I look at it,
you just used to get in their face and hack them
exactly.
Slash them.
But a lot of it for me is that this team is defending as a group of 5,
right?
Better than they did a year ago too.
Yeah.
So sometimes, bad. Okay, a bad goal, right? But when you've been hung out to dry.
Yeah.
So I think it all intertwines, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you're defending and you're not giving up high quality chances, and you better expect him to make the save.
And that's to Gus's to protect Gus and Fleury a little bit here. That was Bill Guerin's point coming into the season, is that even though we always threw these analytics out there that the Wild defended well enough to make their life easier, his point was always like when you have a laundry list of injuries the way that they have, and you don't trust the defenseman in front of you because it's always changing, that was a big reason why maybe Gustafsson and Fleury didn't have great numbers last year. And this year, what's been impressive is they've had the same number of injuries, if not worse.
Right.
And
right.
yet,
they're top 3 out at one time, right?
Yeah, and Gus is just playing superb right now. So it's really impressive to see.
All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll do one more before we hand it over to the Minnesota Wild Radio Network. Of course, the Wild in town tonight, wrapping up a 7-game homestand. They'll host the Buffalo Sabres. Puck will drop at 1:08. More Russo when we continue on Beyond the Pond.
This is Wild head coach John Hines, and you're listening to Beyond the Pond with Fallness and Micheletti on KFAN.
Steve's Appliances, fast